I was 7, my brother 10, my mom in her early 40s, my grandmother, her mom, in her 60s. So we were all cogent. No one was too young or too senile to not recall this nonsense. Yet, still no bloody answer. Grandma lived on an isolated country road in NC that was named after her family, since they were the only crazy fuckers who lived on the land for about 1,000 acres. And I do mean crazy. We have stories about relatives that start with, "You remember that time Uncle Bob was in the ditch with a shotgun?" Which time? Her house had been empty for several weeks while she'd been visiting US and Florida, but we were all back, spending the weekend with her before trekking back to the Sunshine State. The house is in the for-real country, literally over train tracks, past a salvage yard and her nearest neighbor, a cousin. Everyone is related to everyone who owns a house on the road, ain't within screaming distance. Yes, that seems to be a real system of measurement, screaming distance. It's early in the AM, like just before daybreak. We're awake because these are farm freaks who wake at the crack of dawn from sheer ingrained habit. We're eating cereal when we hear someone pull up outside. Curious. We all run to the big picture window that looks onto the front yard. There is a strange truck there. No one seems to be behind the wheel, though the engine is idling. The truck is, well, old for one thing. It's old-timey like from maybe the 1930s. You could picture the Jode family heading to California in this thing. It's rusted, but it was probably once painted blue. We stare at the thing bewildered. Mom asks Grandma if she knows who that is. "Nope, not a clue," says Grandma. She runs to get the phone to call her cousin and asks him to come up. She thinks maybe it's a hired hand and he's just at the wrong farm. Just as she asks him to come on down, the phone goes dead. Well, that's unsettling. All at once, there is a loud, insistent banging on the front door. We all scream. My grandma, who is terrifyingly resourceful, huddles us all into the living room, away from a window where anyone can see us. Then, while Mom, me, and my brother tremble there on the couch, she grabs a serrated bread knife from the kitchen and cautiously approaches the front door. She peeks out a side window, very stealthily. She turns back to us and looks confused. She shakes her head like, no one is there. We all kind of breathe easier. Then every goddamn door in the house is banging relentlessly. I can still hear it, rhythmic and terrifying, like all the doors are about to splinter and crack. There were 2 doors in the basement beneath us, so the sound is also a reverberation at our feet. The 3 ground floor doors are shaking. We can see them trembling and jerking on their hinges from our vantage point on the couch. Finally, Mom runs to the window, either from a psychotic break with reality or terror. I have no clue. She cries, "Oh, thank Christ, Cousin is here." We run to her and peek out the picture window. There is no one that we can see in the yard, but we can't see all the doors from our viewpoint. Cousin walks by truck with a shotgun in his hand. Cousin, it should be noted, has pretty much every gun ever made. He looks puzzled, looking at the rear of the truck. Then he glances in the cab window and he stops. He goes pale, runs a hand down his face. Then he runs towards the house, towards us. My grandmother flings open the kitchen door as she sees him coming. He shouts, "Everyone get behind the couch. Get down." He runs past us as we bolt for the couch. The banging starts again, all the doors, and now we can hear the windows rattle. It's like a tornado or the end of the world. We are too scared to even scream. Cousin flings open the front door and fires the huge shotgun, once bang deafening. As he does, the truck roars into life and it sounds like a train. We scramble up. The banging stops mercifully. Cousin is advancing onto the lawn, gun leveled at the truck. We run behind him, wanting to be out of that shaking, quivering house and near the dude with the gun. The truck peels out backwards, cutting across the yard and racing into a breakneck speed. Tires skew, rubber is burned. Cousin fires again, and we all cower behind him. He blows out the back window with the sound of 1,000 plates smashing into linoleum, but the truck never even hiccups, just roars down the road. No tags, not even a vanity plate on the back. There was an '01 behind the wheel of that thing. We all had a clear view. Everyone agreed. Not a driver in the cab. Well, not anything we could see anyhow. The police were called. The phone line had been cut. There was not a single boot print in the entire yard except Cousin's, from where he'd run into and out of the house. Cousin reported that there had been no plate, but when he looked into the cab, it looked like something from a horror movie. He said there were all kinds of weird restraints, handcuffs, C-clamps, nylon straps, and he said the floorboards looked covered in what smelled like blood to him. Cousin was famous for his keen sense of smell, and the window was down, so it's possible. Cousin said he thought he saw a blur of something out the picture window and ran to fire the first shot, but missed because once he stood there, nothing or no one was on the lawn or in the truck. Then it shot backwards out of the yard and out of our lives, leaving no answers, just a deep sense of unease every time we'd visit. Grandma and Cousin have passed, deeply religious people. They stuck by their unchanging versions of the story until they died. My brother, mother, and I have never been able to figure it out. Neither did the cops. I think it should be noted. We don't know how all the windows and doors were banging. And we don't know why we never saw a soul anywhere or how they could get around the sides of the house without leaving a trace in the damp earth. When I was 8, my family moved into an old colonial that was built in 1810. My father still lives there. Until I was 17, before I fell asleep, I would feel pressure next to me, as if someone sat down on the bed next to me. This would always be accompanied with a feeling of increased pressure in the air. Although I knew this probably didn't happen to everyone, I didn't think about it much. Until I got a cat. He was a present for my 12th birthday. Each night, he would sack out on the bed near my feet. Each night, he would bolt from a dead sleep and glare at something in the doorway before hightailing it out of there. A few moments later, the pressure would return. Again, while this was a weird thing to happen, I didn't really question it. Maybe the cat was just neurotic. I didn't talk about this nightly occurrence to anyone. However, I did refer this feeling / presence / what have you as Charlotte. I don't know why. So one day in the summer when I was 13, an elderly man and his middle-aged daughter pull up to our house and explain that the father lived in the house with his aunt while he was a boy and that he raised his family there for a few years. They had been visiting family in the neighborhood, and they wondered if they could take a tour for old time's sake. My mom said sure. My sister and I led them around the house, and they recalled different memories. Afterward, my mom asked them if they remembered strange occurrences or stories about the house. Like ghosts? The old man asked and chuckled. His daughter became very quiet and said firmly, "It's not funny, Dad." The man explained that everyone who slept in one bedroom felt a little unsettled, and his daughter interrupted to say that she always felt as if someone sat on the edge of the bed and she tried to go to sleep. Her father said they used to joke that it was just his aunt looking out for them, his Aunt Charlotte. This confirmed what I had never admitted to myself. I had a freaking ghost that basically tucked me in at night for the previous 5 years. Still, going to bed was never freaky or scary. I just tried to ignore the feeling when it came, until one night when I was 16. My parents had been going through a weird patch in their marriage. I was feeling depressed, and in general, it was a weird year. I went to bed. After about 20 minutes, the cat took his typical bolting exit from the bed, and I felt the familiar pressure on my side. Then I felt a hand brush through my hair. Then I ran straight downstairs to the living room where my mom was dozing. She woke up when I burst in the room, saw my face, and asked what was wrong. I told her I had a nightmare and left it at that. I spent a week sleeping in the guest room. When I got the nerve to go back to my room, I was nearly asleep when I realized I didn't feel the pressure next to me. I did feel pressure in the air. I rolled on my back and saw the figure of a woman in her 60s. wearing a house dress, her hair pulled back in a bun, with her arms folded. She was looking right at me, very concerned. When I found my voice, she disappeared. I said out loud, "I don't care if you stay, but I can never, ever, ever see you again." I never did. However, a few years later, after my parents divorced and my dad moved in his girlfriend and her 4-year-old son, I wasn't really surprised when she told me her little boy said a lady named Charlotte told him stories at night. Nothing happened when I was younger, but in my early teens I started to notice weird occurrences. And since then I've read that it's common for things to start around teenage girls' adolescences. The very first thing happened my freshman year of high school when I had a sleepover and several girls brought cameras and took pictures. When they got their photos back, there were pictures in 2 separate rolls which seemed to have white vortex shapes swooping across me, obscuring my face and upper body. Immediately after this, an odd tapping began coming from my bedroom walls. At first I thought nothing of it because it's obviously a very old house and they creak. But as I heard it more frequently, I started realizing that it had some very strange characteristics. First of all, it only ever seemed to happen as I got into bed when I was in that receptive, almost asleep stage. I had my desk in there, too, where I would spend many long hours doing homework, so I would have noticed if they had come at other times. Also, they alternated walls. They would rapidly switch from one to another, and sometimes they'd go simultaneously on 2 opposite walls, then switch suddenly to the other 2 opposite walls. Then something even more dramatic happened. In childhood, and up until I was 17, I had bunk beds, which were actually great since I was always having friends spend the night. My house was where we all hung out due to size, location, and how well my parents got along with everyone. One night, I had just gotten into bed on the top bunk, when suddenly the sheets were jerked sharply towards the wall, pulling partially off me. It was almost as if someone were in the bottom bunk, playing a trick on me or trying to get my attention. So that was very strange but felt almost playful, so I didn't feel too scared by it. But it was very odd nonetheless. When I was 17, I got a new bed, so we started dismantling the bunk bed and first gave away the top mattress to our neighbors who had a young son. So for a little while I used the top bunk as a sort of shelf, but it still had the solid railing, so it was boxing on all sides. One day I put a pile of textbooks and magazines on the top bunk in some boxes I had sitting there, and was on the computer on the other side of the room typing something up, my back turned. Suddenly there was a loud series of quick crashes, and I whirled around just in time to see my last textbook sliding over the side of the top bunk and cascade to the floor on top of the other's books. Since the railing is about 10 inches high on all sides, and the boxes were about the same, and the pile was not that tall, they would have had to have somehow jumped over both the side of the box and then the side of the bed. The creepiest experience was when a friend was spending the night, and we were getting ready for bed, and my cat, who is the most docile, sweet, and gentle cat I've ever known, was curled up on my lap purring loudly. My friend switched off the light, and he continued to purr warmly. But not 10 seconds later, he drastically changed on the turn of a dime. His body suddenly stiffened. All his fur rose up completely on end. He dug his claws deep into my thigh, enough to draw blood, and started to growl loudly. The growls quickly escalated into horrible piercing noises, like shrieks, at the top of his lungs that I have never heard any cat make. The whole time his entire body was rigid and tense also. Even aside from that, there was a general off feeling in the room, and my friend quickly rushed up to turn the light back on. Almost immediately the claws pulled out from my skin, and he relaxed and settled down, but still seemed unsettled. That only happened once in his whole life, but it remains extremely disconcerting to me to this day. Then last year, one of the strangest things yet happened to me. I was home from London on break, and though nothing of note had happened for years, that changed. I was alone because my parents were at work, but out of habit, I locked the bathroom door anyway when I went to take a shower. Nothing was noticeably amiss in there. Everything seemed in order. I laid my clothes down on the floor and stepped straight into the bathtub where, I took a really long shower. After a long time, I opened the curtain back up, and I immediately and strongly felt like someone had been in there unnoticed while I was showering. But I checked the lock, which is an old-fashioned latch on the inside, and it was still fastened. I grabbed a towel, stepped out, then noticed something really strange. The bottle of baby powder, which we never use. It's typically on the bottom shelf in a basket. Was not only out but lying open right in the very middle of the bathroom floor, with its contents scattered everywhere in the entrance area. Footsteps led through it and onto the dark yellow bath mat, stopping short of the tub. At first that's strange. I really don't remember it being there, but I guess I must have walked through it to get here. I was almost positive that it hadn't been there since it was so clearly right in the middle of where I would have walked, and such an obvious mess, but it was the only thing I could think of as an explanation. But then I noticed that one of the footsteps was half on the mat, half on my jeans, and that there was another obvious footprint on my jeans after that. Then I thought, though even more skeptically, that I must have stepped on my jeans somehow before getting in, even though I was convinced that I had stepped straight out of them and gotten directly in. Still, it was the only explanation I could think of. However, when I looked more closely at the prints, I couldn't convince myself of anything. They were significantly smaller than mine, almost like a child's. After that day, and in retrospect, everything that has happened almost seems like something a child would do. They're all fairly playful or something your younger sibling would do. About 10 years ago, my 3-year-old son and I moved into a new house. Well, it was new to us, but it was actually a very old house. The inside of the house always seemed to be just a little darker and a little colder than it should be. I had noticed that the first time I went to view the house, but as it was summer, I figured it would save on cooling costs. Soon after we moved and a friend of mine came by. We were sitting and talking for a few minutes, but she seemed uncomfortable the whole time. Then I saw in her face that something in the other room caught her attention. Her eyes got big. She said, "I have to go." I asked her what was wrong, but she said she didn't want to tell me. I kept after her because her reaction was kind of freaking me out. On her way out the door, she finally said this house is haunted, but she wouldn't tell me what made her think so. Still to this day, 10 years later, she refuses to tell me what she saw. About a week after that night, my 3-year-old son casually asked me who the old lady in the bathroom was. One day I was leaving for work, but once I got to the car, I realized I needed to run back in the house to get something. I walked into the house, and as soon as I got inside, this framed photo on the wall shot off the wall. Now, I don't mean it fell because of some issue with the nail or anything like that. It shot horizontally away from the wall, not vertically down, and it landed on a mosaic table with enough force to break some of the tiles off of it. I felt like whatever was in the house was pissed that I came back, and after it thought I had left for the day. After living in the house for about 6 months, I noticed a weird square cut into the boards on the deck. There was no handle, but I was able to pry it up. The hole was just big enough to fit through, and there was a ladder going down. For some reason, I went down and found myself in what looked like a homemade basement. It was basically just a room dug out of the earth. No constructed walls or stone supports or anything like you would expect if it was a basement that was built with the house. It was very dark, but I could see over in the corner a suspicious-looking large stone. It looked like one of those light-colored 100-plus-year-old headstones that you see in old cemeteries. Just then some camel crickets started jumping at me. So I got my ass out of that basement as fast as I could and never went back. Now, this is the part that affected me most and the reason we left the house. One night, I was in bed but not yet asleep, laying on my stomach. I heard someone walk into the room. I heard footsteps come from the doorway over to my bed. I didn't realize until later that the fact that I heard the footsteps was weird because the room was carpeted. When the footsteps reached my bed, I felt someone put their hands on my back. 2 hands just gently laid flat on my back and kept there. I assumed it was my son. I said, "What are you doing?" But no one answered. I looked up and no one was there. I got up and checked my son's bedroom. but he was in bed asleep. We moved out soon after that. My mother worked in a daycare that had taken over the wing of an old school, and the building is notoriously haunted with the ghost of the school's namesake and founder, Colonel Walker. The attic of the building was used as storage for the daycare, and many people reported small, fairly unobtrusive events while being up there. Things like boxes shifting around behind you, drawers opening on the other side of the room where you were, curtains suddenly moving, the feeling of someone else being in the attic with you. But the kids were the most in tune, it seems. I know that lots of the kids talked about the old man at the daycare, which was staffed entirely by women. And I have definitely seen the kids react by all at once looking at the door as if someone entered the room when no one had. Personally, I always felt as if someone was walking directly behind me whenever I had to go from one end of the hallway to another. And sometimes I would hang out in the kitchen waiting for my mom to finish up work for the day while I finished my homework or something. I often felt like someone was there with me. I spent a lot of time there, especially in the summer when school was out, helping around the daycare. The most famous piece of evidence of Colonel Walker's ghost was a picture taken at Halloween of all the kids in their costumes. Right in the back, standing behind the children and looking straight at the camera, is the watery and somewhat blurred face and upper body of an older man. Like, you don't even have to squint or tilt your head to make out that it is there. Now I know that it could have been some bleed from some other photos or something, but I think, given all the other evidence, it seems they got the Colonel on camera.